It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome Her Excellency, Ms. Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Bintou Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Monsieur Jean-Pierre Lacroix, Under Secretary General for Peace Operation, and Mrs. Joyce Msuya, Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration for item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Jean-Pierre Lacroix.
Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil de sécurité, Madame la ministre d'État, ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République démocratique du Congo, Monsieur le représentant permanent de la République du Rwanda et autres distingués ambassadeurs et représentants, je remercie le Conseil de sécurité de cette occasion d'intervenir sur la situation prévalente dans l'Est de la République démocratique du Congo. Je ferai une brève déclaration liminaire avant l'intervention de mes collègues Bintou Keita et Joyce Msuya. Comme cela a été discuté avec la présidence du Conseil de sécurité en raison d'engagements antérieurs dans le cadre d'une visite officielle en République arab-syrienne, je ne serai sans doute pas en mesure de participer à l'ensemble de la séance et je prie les membres du Conseil de sécurité et les autres participants à travers vous, Monsieur le Président, de m'en excuser. Monsieur le Président, la réunion d'aujourd'hui se tient dans un contexte de détérioration majeure de la situation à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo. Depuis le début de l'année, le M23 a lancé des opérations offensives de grande envergure dans l'est de la RDC avec l'appui des forces armées du Rwanda. Ces actions leur ont permis d'étendre leurs liens territoriaux de manière significative en l'espace de quelques semaines, tout en ouvrant un nouveau front dans le sud Kivu, où la MONUSCO s'est retirée le 30 juin 2024. Les Nations Unies sont profondément préoccupées par la reprise des hostilités qui a entraîné la prise de Saké, une localité stratégique située à quelques kilomètres de Goma, menaçant directement des millions de civils et les casques bleus déployés avec le mandat d'assurer leur protection physique. À cet égard, je me réfère à la déclaration du secrétaire général sur ce sujet qui vient d'être publiée et je me permets d'inviter les membres du Conseil et les autres participants à la consultation. Le 23 et 24 janvier, le M23 a tiré sur les positions de la MONUSCO et de la SAMI-DRC. Au cours des dernières 48 heures, 2 casques bleus de la MONUSCO appartenant au contingent sud-africain et un casque bleu uruguayen ont été tués dans l'accomplissement du mandat qui leur a été confié par ce Conseil. Je rappelle que ce mandat porte en particulier sur la protection des civils et le soutien à la lutte contre les groupes armés qui sévissent en RDC.
combating armed
11
groups
autres casques
in
bleus ont
the
été blessés et
DRC.
reçoivent des soins à
Other blue
l'hôpital des
helmets
Nations Unies à
were
Goma.
wounded and have been
Des
cared
soldats
for
de
in
la
UN
SAMI-DRC, la force
hospitals
de
in
la
Goma.
SADC, à laquelle la MONUSCO apporte un soutien en vertu d'un mandat donné
SADC
par ce
forces
Conseil,
that
ont
the
également été
MONUSCO
tués
forces
et
also
blessés. Et il y a également de très
have
nombreuses
also
victimes
suffered
civiles et des déplacements additionnels de
injuries.
populations
There have also
importants
been
dans un
significant
contexte
injuries and
humanitaire
displacement among the
déjà
civilian
extrêmement
population in
difficile.
an already extremely difficult
Je souhaite saisir cette
context.
opportunité
I'd like to
pour
take this
exprimer au nom
opportunity
du
to
secrétaire
express on
général des
behalf of the
Nations Unies
Secretary
nos
General of the
plus
United
profondes
Nations
condoléances
our
aux familles
deepest
des casques bleus
condolences
décédés,
to the
ainsi qu'à leur
families
gouvernement et au
of the
peuple
fallen
sud-africain et
blue
uruguayen. Je souhaite
helmets
un
and
prompt
also
rétablissement aux
to
blessés.
the
J'exprime également mes
Uruguayan
condoléances au gouvernement des pays contributeurs de troupes
forces.
de la
And
SAMI-DRC
I
et aux familles
also
des victimes.
express my
Je
condolences
rends
to
hommage à
families
tous
of
les
the
casques bleus
victims.
de la
I pay
MONUSCO dans
tribute
la
to all
accomplissement de leur
MONUSCO
mandat visant à
blue
protéger les
helmets
civils et
carrying
contrer
out
la
their
menace posée par les groupes armés. Et je
work
saisis cette
against the
occasion
threats
pour rappeler
against them
que
at the
les
moment.
attaques contre les
And I
casques
wish to
bleus et le
recall that
personnel
the threats
civil des
against
Nations
blue
Unies
helmets and
peuvent
civilian personnel
constituer
of the
des crimes
United
de guerre.
Nations can represent war
Mr.
crimes.
President, distinguished members of the Council, with the fate of Goma and its millions of inhabitants hanging in the balance, MONUSCO has shown admirable resolve in delivering on its protection of civilians mandate, often at great cost, while doing its utmost to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel. To this end, MONUSCO has reinforced its blocking positions in coordination with the FRDC and SAMI-DRC to prevent the M23's further advance towards Goma. Steps have also been taken to ensure the swift resupply of UN contingents based in M23 controlled areas, notably in Kiwanja, Kanyabayonga, and Kichanga. The mission has activated contingency measures to facilitate CASEVAC and MEDEVAC procedures as required. SRG Bintu Keita will provide further details on the steps being taken by the mission to deliver on its mandated responsibilities while doing its utmost ensuring the safety of UN personnel and installation. Mr. President, at this critical juncture, with the lives of countless vulnerable civilians, peacekeepers, and the respect of this Council's mandate at stake, MONUSCO remains committed to the robust defense of its mandate under very challenging conditions. The Council must honor the sacrifice made by the peacekeepers who have laid down their lives in pursuit of this noble goal by sending a clear and unequivocal message to the M23 and its backers that actions endangering the lives of civilians and UN peacekeepers will not be tolerated. All parties to the conflict must abide by international humanitarian law. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, il est impératif que le M23 cesse immédiatement ses hostilités, se retire des territoires occupés. La violation de la souveraineté et de l'intégrité territoriale de la RDC constitue une atteinte aux principes fondamentaux du droit international et de la Charte des Nations Unies. Les Nations Unies continueront de collaborer avec les principaux acteurs pour encourager les parties prenantes à reprendre les négociations dans le cadre du processus de Luanda que les Nations Unies soutiennent totalement. Dans ce contexte, je tiens à rappeler les progrès significatifs réalisés au cours des derniers mois dans le cadre de ce processus. Il est crucial que ces acquis ne soient pas perdus. Le retrait des forces rwandaises de l'Est de la RDC doit être effectif. Le plan de neutralisation des FDLR doit être mis en œuvre. Et le mécanisme de vérification ad hoc renforcé doit être pleinement opérationnel. Les populations menacées par cette offensive du M23 et les pays contributeurs qui ont mis leurs soldats et leurs policiers à la disposition des Nations Unies pour assurer leur protection s'attendent à une réponse ferme de ce Conseil permettant de rétablir un environnement propice à la poursuite des efforts politiques visant à trouver une solution durable à la crise actuelle. Il est encore possible d'éviter le pire pourvu que ce Conseil agisse sans délai. Je vous remercie.
Without any further delay. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Lacroix for his briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Bintu Keita.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for convening this urgent meeting today to discuss the alarming developments in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. On 23rd January, the military governor of North Kivu, General Peter Chirimwami, was wounded on the battlefield and subsequently passed away. So far, MONUSCO has lost 3 peacekeepers trying to protect Sake and Goma from the M23's advance. I would like to express my condolences to the Democratic Republic of the Congo government, people, as well as to the governments of the troop contributing countries, to those who were killed while implementing the mission's mandate. I also wish a swift recovery to those injured, including our 11 MONUSCO peacekeepers. Today, despite ongoing MONUSCO support to FRDC, M23, and Rwandan forces penetrated Munigi, captured in the outskirts of Goma city, causing mass panic and flight among the population. Roads are blocked, and the airport can no longer be used for evacuation or humanitarian efforts. M23 has declared the airspace over Goma closed. In other words, we are trapped. I call on this council to act now to secure the civilian population, humanitarian aid workers, and all United Nations personnel. Mr. President, when I presented the last report of the Secretary General on the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo on 9 December, the 23rd March movement, M23, with the active support of the Rwandan armed forces, had consolidated its occupation in North Kivu province, doubling its controlled territory compared to 2012. Today, M23 has expanded its control in North Kivu and extended its advance into South Kivu province, from which MONUSCO withdrew in June 2024. It has received reinforcement and supplies to strengthen its position along several axes, both south and north of Goma. It notably deployed a heavy presence near Sake, 25 kilometers west of Goma, and is advancing in Munigi, 9 kilometers north of Goma. In line with its protection of civilians mandate, MONUSCO has enhanced its support to the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo, FRDC, by sharing information, participating in joint tactical planning, and actively participating in combat, along with SADC mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, SAMI-DRC. MONUSCO has notably activated Operation Springbok 3 and deployed 1 quick reaction force, 1 rapid deployment battalion, a reserve battalion, a platoon size of special forces, and an artillery battery to reinforce its position to counter M23's advance. In a context of permanent movement of population fleeing for their lives or used as human shields, the military response, especially the use of MONUSCO artillery, is being carefully calibrated to avoid harming civilians and our forces on the ground or damaging civilian facilities. The United Nations also temporarily relocate non-essential personnel from Goma. These efforts are still underway. This measure aims to guarantee the safety of personnel while maintaining essential United Nations operations in the province. This relocation in no way affects the unwavering commitment of the United Nations to provide humanitarian aid and protect civilians in North Kivu. GPS jamming and spoofing incidents have resumed more intensely than ever before. These attacks hamper the protection of civilians and the safety and security of United Nations personnel. The mission stands ready to provide documentation in support of the Democratic Republic of Congo's complaint to the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, and encourage member states to do the same. While MONUSCO's robust posture in support of FRDC and SAMI DRC has helped counter mis- and disinformation, the Congolese authorities and MONUSCO continue to coordinate joint communication and ensure clear, unified messaging. Nevertheless, I must draw the Council's attention to a troubling rise in targeted hate speech led by M23-affiliated online companies. Their hateful rhetoric targets me as special representative of the Secretary General, but also the mission spokesperson who has received threats of sexual violence. I call on the Congolese authorities to clearly condemn hate speech that targets especially human rights defenders and civil society actors. So far, at least 32 human rights defenders have approached MONUSCO for protection measures. In response, the mission implements individual protection mechanisms with human rights networks. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
plus que jamais,
more than ever,
nous devons trouver
we
une
must
solution
find a
politique.
political solution.
Une déplacée du Nord
A
Kivu a
displaced
récemment
person
insisté
from
que
North
même
Kivu
la
recently
Seconde Guerre
insisted that
mondiale s'est
even
terminée
the
grâce au
Second World
dialogue.
War ended thanks to
J'appelle
dialogue.
donc la RDC, le
So I would
Rwanda
like
à
to call
poursuivre
on
les
the DRC and
négociations
Rwanda
politiques
to
dans le
continue
cadre du
political
processus de
negotiations in the
Luanda.
context of the Luanda process.
À ce titre,
In this regard,
la rhétorique hostile et les accusations
hostile rhetoric
mutuelles doivent
and
cesser
mutual
pour laisser
accusations
place à
must
des
end
échanges
to
et
make
des
way
actions
for
constructives.
discussions and constructive steps.
Je salue les efforts de la
I
communauté
welcome the efforts of the
internationale pour
international
préserver
community
ce
to
processus,
preserve this
surtout
process,
après le
above
sommet
all
avorté du
after
15
the
décembre 2024.
aborted summit of the 15th of December
Concrètement,
2024.
j'appelle aussi le Rwanda
Specifically,
à
I
retirer
also
ses
call
forces
on
du
Rwanda
territoire
to
congolais,
withdraw its
à
forces
cesser
from
son
the
appui
Congolese
au
territory,
M23
to end
et à
its support for the
déployer au plus vite
M23,
ses
and
délégués dans
to,
le
as soon as
mécanisme
possible,
de
deploy its
vérification
delegates
ad hoc
to
renforcé
the ad
pour
hoc
compléter
strengthened
les
verification
effectifs de
mechanism
l'Angola
to
et de
join
la RDC.
the
J'appelle de plus la RDC à
effectively
mener des efforts
members from Angola and the
significatifs pour
DRC. I
neutraliser
also
les
call on the
FDLR.
DRC to make
Je
significant
réaffirme
efforts to
l'engagement
neutralize the
de la
FDLR.
MONUSCO à
I
soutenir
reaffirm
ces efforts
MONUSCO's
en
commitment
lien
to supporting
avec
these
son
efforts
mandat.
under the context of its
En
mandate.
parallèle,
In parallel,
j'encourage une synergie
I
étroite entre
encourage
le
close
processus
synergies
de
between
Luanda
the
et le
Luanda
processus de
process and
Nairobi
the
en
Nairobi
cours de
process, which
revitalisation.
is currently
Pour
being
favoriser des
revitalized.
avancées notables,
This
il
to
faudrait faire des concessions.
promote
Notamment,
notable
le M23
progress, we must make
devrait se
concessions,
retirer
particularly the
immédiatement
M23
vers les
must
positions
immediately
d'avant le
withdraw
4
towards
octobre.
the pre-4th of
J'appelle toutes
August
les parties à
positions.
respecter leurs
I
obligations de
call on
protéger
all
les
parties
civils
to
dans
respect
le
their
plein respect
obligations
du
to
droit
protect civilians
international
in full
humanitaire
respect for
et du
international
droit
humanitarian law
international
and
des droits de
international
l'homme.
human rights law.
Les infrastructures
Civilian
civiles fournissant des
infrastructure
services
providing
essentiels
essential
aux civils
services to
ne doivent
civilians
également
must
jamais
also
être
never
prises pour
be
cible.
targeted.
Monsieur le Président,
President,
alors que l'Angola se prépare
as
à
Angola
présider
is
l'Union
preparing to
africaine en
preside over the
février,
African
je
Union
soutiens un
in
deuxième
February,
sommet
I
quadripartite de la
support a
SADC, la
second
conférence
SADC
internationale
quadripartite
sur la région
summit
des Grands Lacs,
involving
CIRGL,
SADC, the
la communauté
International Conference
économique
of
des
the
États
Great
de
Lakes
l'Afrique
region,
centrale,
the Economic
CEAC, et la
Community of
communauté de
Central
l'Afrique de
African
l'Est,
States, ECAS,
CAE,
and
pour
the East
renforcer
African
les efforts de
Community,
paix.
the EAC,
Il
to
serait également
strengthen
crucial
these
de convoquer
peace efforts.
d'urgence
It's also
un nouveau
crucial
sommet
to
tripartite
urgently convene
entre
a fresh
l'Agence des Nations
tripartite
Unies
summit
pour les
between
réfugiés
the
HCR, la
UNHCR,
République
the
démocratique du Congo et le
DRC, and
Rwanda.
Rwanda.
De plus, il sera
Furthermore,
crucial de
it's
tenir le
essential
12e sommet du
to
mécanisme
ensure
de
that
suivi
the
régional
12th summit
du
of
Conseil
the
de paix
regional
et
follow-up
de sécurité de
mechanism
l'Union
of the
africaine
African Union
pour
Peace and
relancer
Security
l'accord
Council
cadre
is
pour la paix,
held
la
to
sécurité
to
et la
relaunch the
coopération.
framework agreement for
J'encourage la
peace,
présidence
security and
de
cooperation.
l'Angola à l'Union africaine
I
de
encourage the
promouvoir
Angolan presidency of the
l'inclusion
African
des
Union
femmes
to
dans
promote
les
the inclusion of
initiatives de paix.
women in peace
En
initiatives.
RDC,
In the
cela
DRC,
pourrait passer
this
par la
could
mise en œuvre de
involve
la stratégie nationale
the
pour une
implementation of a
masculinité
national
positive,
strategy
ainsi que
for positive
l'établissement
masculinity, as
du
well as
comité
the establishment
interministériel et
of
du
an
Conseil national
interministerial
du genre
committee
et de
and
la
national
parité
council
prévu dans
on
la
gender
loi
and parity,
de 2015
provided
sur
for
la
both
parité.
in the law of
Monsieur le
2015
Président,
on parity.
la MONUSCO accompagne les efforts
President
visant à
MONUSCO is
tenir
supporting
tous les
efforts to hold
responsables
all of those
de
responsible
violation des
for
droits
human
humains
rights violations
redevables.
accountable.
Il est ainsi important
It is,
d'identifier les victimes
in
pour
addition,
leur rendre
important
justice,
to
tout en réduisant le
identify
risque de
victims to
répétition
ensure that
de la
justice can
violence,
be done
y
to them,
compris
while
celle
also
basée
curbing the
sur le
risk
genre.
that
En
violence, including
complément,
gender-based
des
violence,
mandats
is
internationaux doivent
repeated.
être émis
In
contre ceux
addition,
qui alimentent
international
l'insécurité
warrants must
et
be issued
commettent
against
des
those
violations
that
des
are
droits
fueling
humains et du
insecurity
droit
and committing
international
human
humanitaire.
rights and
Avec
IHL
l'envoyé spécial pour
violations,
la région des Grands Lacs, l'ambassadeur
particularly
Wang Xia,
with
et tous
the
mes
special envoy for the
autres
region
collègues,
of the Great Lakes region,
j'appelle
Ambassador
le
Huang
Conseil à
Xia. I
prendre des
call
mesures
on the Council to take
décisives,
decisive
y compris
steps,
des sanctions
including
ciblées
targeted
contre les auteurs
sanctions
des
against the
violations.
perpetrators of violations.
Aucune exception
No
ne doit être faite.
exception must be made.
Je vous remercie de votre aimable
Thank you.
attention.
I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for this opportunity to brief the Council on the humanitarian situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Mr. President, the crisis in Eastern DRC is at a dangerous point. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, and if hostilities spill into Goma, a densely populated urban center, the impact on civilians could be devastating. More than 21 million people already need aid across the country, one of the highest numbers worldwide. Approximately 1 million people had already sought refuge in neighboring countries. The escalation in the east threatens to make a critical humanitarian situation even worse. In North and South Kivu, hundreds of civilians have been killed and injured in the last few weeks. Hundreds of thousands have fled their homes or shelters, often multiple times, to escape gunfire and shelling, especially around Sake and Minova. Humanitarian access remains constrained due to insecurity. Hospitals, including Dosho and Kieshero in Goma, are overwhelmed. Medical facilities in Minova are also struggling to tend to the hundreds of people in need of treatment for gunshot and shrapnel wounds. Bombings in overcrowded displacement sites in and around Sake and Minova have resulted in casualties, including among children, and destroyed shelters, causing panic and further displacement. I'm particularly concerned about the impact on women and girls. We already know that gender-based violence increased by 300% in recent years, and that 2/3 of all cases had occurred in 3 eastern provinces of North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri. Mr. President, the Secretary General has emphasized the importance of upholding international humanitarian and human rights law and ensuring immediate and unimpeded humanitarian access to populations in need. I reiterate this call. We urge all parties to protect civilians and critical infrastructure they rely on, respect the civilian nature of displacement sites, and avoid using wide area explosives and heavy weapons in populated areas. This will be particularly important should the hostilities spread into Goma, given the risks of conflict in urban areas. All parties must take constant care to spare civilians and civilian objects throughout military operations. Mr. President, in these challenging circumstances, our humanitarian partners have bravely and tirelessly continued their efforts to enable life-saving operations by negotiating access, including by providing critical care through our partners, particularly NGOs that deliver medical and food assistance. Council members, to address this escalating humanitarian crisis before the situation worsens further, I have three asks to the Council. First, I urge this Council and all Member States to leverage their influence to ensure that international humanitarian law is respected by all parties. Civilians must be protected. IDP sites and medical facilities must be protected. Rapid, unimpeded, and safe humanitarian access to those in need must be facilitated. Second, since we are at the start of the year and many funding sources remain unavailable or delayed for various reasons, adequate funding is essential to enable and sustain urgent humanitarian action. In light of the scale and severity of the current situation, we are allocating $17 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund for immediate life-saving interventions. However, let's be clear, additional resources are urgently needed. Third, I urge the Council and all Member States to use their influence to end the hostilities. The scale of suffering in the DRC demands urgent attention. The plight of the country's women, men, and children cannot continue to go unnoticed. Thank you.
I thank Mrs. Msuya for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make a statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
je remercie tout d'abord le
I'd like
secrétaire
to begin
général
by
pour les opérations de
thanking
paix, la
the
représentante
Special
spéciale
Peace
du secrétaire
Operations,
général et la
the Special
sous-secrétaire
Representative of the Secretary
générale
General,
pour les affaires
and
humanitaires.
the Assistant Secretary General for
Je salue la
Humanitarian
présence
Affairs.
parmi nous de la
I
ministre des
welcome
Affaires
here the
étrangères
Minister
de
of
la
Foreign
République
Affairs
démocratique
of
du
the
Congo.
Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Le Conseil de sécurité se réunit aujourd'hui en raison de la détérioration rapide de la situation dans le Nord Kivu, en République démocratique du Congo, de la prise de Saké et de l'encerclement de Goma par le N23, permis par le soutien actif des forces de défense du Rwanda. La situation est grave et ce Conseil doit en prendre la mesure. Il affirme sa solidarité envers la République démocratique du Congo et son attachement indéfectible à son intégrité territoriale et à sa souveraineté. Elle exprime sa très vive préoccupation quant à la dangereuse escalade du conflit dans le Nord Kivu, autour de Goma. Elle condamne fermement l'offensive en cours, conduite par le M23, activement soutenue par le Rwanda. La présence en République démocratique du Congo d'une force militaire étrangère contre la volonté de l'État congolais est une violation claire de la Charte des Nations Unies. Cette offensive, comme le soutien aux groupes armés par toutes les parties, fait porter un risque majeur sur la sécurité des populations civiles et conduit actuellement au déplacement de dizaines de milliers de civils. Le M23 doit cesser immédiatement son offensive
cease
se
its
retirer des
offensive and
territoires dont il
withdraw
a pris le
from
contrôle.
the territory that it has taken
La
control.
France appelle instamment à un retour au
urgently
cessez-le-feu
calls for a
et une
return of the
reprise du
ceasefire
dialogue.
and a
Il
resumption
n'y a
of
pas d'issue
dialogue. There
militaire
is no
au conflit.
military outcome
Le
for
président
this
de la
conflict.
République, Emmanuel
The
Macron, l'a
President of the
rappelé
Republic,
hier
Emmanuel
au
Macron,
président
recalled this
Kagame et
yesterday to
Tshisekedi,
President
avec
Kagame
lesquels
and
il
Tshisekedi,
s'est entretenu.
with whom he
Le
held
dialogue
meetings.
engagé dans le
The
cadre des
dialogue
processus de
undertaken with
Luanda
regard
et de
to
Nairobi,
under the
avec
Nairobi
le
and
plein
Luanda
soutien de la France,
processes with
doit
the full
reprendre sans
support of
délai.
France must
Un
resume without
processus
delay.
politique
A
doit
political
redémarrer.
process
La
must
France
also
est
resume.
prête à l'appuyer.
France stands ready to support it.
La force n'est pas une option. Dans
Force
ce
is not an
cadre,
option here.
la France
In
appelle au
this
retrait
context,
des troupes
France
rwandaises du territoire
calls
congolais et à
for
la
a
mise en
withdrawal
œuvre
of
du plan de démantèlement
forces from
des
the
forces
DRC
démocratiques de
territory and
libération
the
du Rwanda,
dismantlement of
conformément
the
aux engagements qu'ils ont pris dans le
these
cadre du
forces
processus
under
de
the
Luanda.
commitments made by Rwanda
Enfin,
under the
la
Luanda
France
process.
exprime
Finally,
tout son
France
soutien à la
expresses its full
MONUSCO,
support to
qui joue un
MONUSCO,
rôle
which is playing a
indispensable pour la
crucial
protection des
role for the
civils
protection of
et dont le
civilians,
mandat a été
whose
renouvelé à
mandate has been
l'unanimité le 20
unanimously renewed
décembre
on the
dernier.
20th of
Nous
December last
condamnons
year.
fermement les
We
attaques
roundly
menées par le
condemn the
M23
attacks
à son
undertaken by the
encontre, qui ont
M23
déjà
against
conduit à la mort de
MONUSCO, which has
plusieurs
already
casques
led
bleus
to
ces
the
derniers
death
jours.
of
Nous
several blue
rappelons
helmets over the
que les
last few
attaques
days.
contre
We
les casques
recall
bleus
that
sont
attacks against blue
susceptibles de
helmets
constituer des crimes de
may
guerre.
represent war
Nous
crimes.
saluons le courage des soldats
We
déployés dans le cadre de la
welcome, we
MONUSCO
pay tribute
et
to
nous
the
exprimons
bravery
nos
of
condoléances aux
MONUSCO
familles de ceux
troops,
ayant fait
and
le sacrifice
we
ultime,
pay
ainsi
our
qu'à l'Afrique du
condolences
Sud,
to the families
à
of the
l'Uruguay
victims, to
et au
South
Malawi.
Africa, to Uruguay,
La
and to
France
Malawi.
condamne également toutes
France
les
also
mesures qui
condemns
entravent
all
la
measures
capacité
that
de la
are
MONUSCO à
hampering
mener à bien son
MONUSCO's
mandat,
ability to fully
en
undertake its
particulier le déploiement
mandate,
de
particularly
systèmes
the
de missiles
deployment
sol-air
of
et de brouillage des signaux
soil-to-air
GPS dans les
missile
zones contrôlées
systems
par
and
le
GPS
M23,
systems in
avec
the
le soutien
M23
direct
controlled areas
des
with the
forces de
direct
défense
force
rwandaises.
of the Rwandan armed
Monsieur le
forces.
Président, les réactions
President,
de la
the
communauté
reactions of the
internationale
international
doivent être
community
à la mesure
must
des conséquences
be commensurate
humanitaires
with the
et
humanitarian and
politiques que
political
provoque
consequences caused
l'offensive en cours du
by the
M23
offensive,
soutenue par les forces de
ongoing
défense de
offensive by the
Rwanda.
M23
La
supported
France
by the
appelle
Rwandan armed forces.
l'ensemble
France
du Conseil
calls
de
on all of the
sécurité à se
Security Council
mobiliser
to
et à condamner
mobilize
d'une même
and
voix
to
cette menace grave
unanimously
à
condemn
la
this
paix
serious
et à la
threat
sécurité
to peace,
régionale et
regional peace
internationale,
and security, and
comme le
international peace and
secrétaire général
security,
des Nations
as the
Unies
United
l'a
Nations
à
Secretary
nouveau
General
fait ce
once
matin
again has
dans
done
des
this
termes
morning
très
in
clairs.
very
Je
clear
vous remercie.
terms. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the A3+ members, Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my country, Sierra Leone. We are deeply grateful to USG Jean-Pierre Lacroix, SISG Ms. Bintou Keita, and ASG Joyce Msuya for their thorough and detailed account of the alarming situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We also warmly welcome the participation of Her Excellency Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, Uruguay, South Africa, and Burundi at this important emergency meeting. At the outset, we extend our heartfelt condolences to the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the family of General Peter Chiriwami, Governor of North Kivu. Our thoughts are also with the families of the fallen U.S. peacekeepers and the Sami DRC contingent. We wish a speedy and full recovery to all those injured. We express our unwavering solidarity with the United Nations and humanitarian actors on the ground who continue their essential work under incredibly difficult and dangerous conditions. Mr. President, in recent days, the A3+ has been actively engaging with a broad range of stakeholders to assess how the UN Security Council can best assist the Congolese people in bringing an end to the violence in Eastern DRC following the breach of the ceasefire by the M23 AFC. Our consultations with the government of the DRC and Rwanda, alongside discussions with the UN Secretariat, has reinforced a singular, undeniable conclusion. The resolution of the conflict in Eastern DRC must be political, not military. In this context, we affirm that the Luanda and Nairobi processes remain viable paths to peace. Let us be clear. While we advocate for a political solution, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Democratic Republic of Congo must be respected by all state and non-state actors alike. In light of the recent development in the DRC, the A3+ would like to underscore the following key points. First, we unequivocally condemn the killing of MONUSCO peacekeepers and Sami DRC military personnel during the current offensive by the M23 AFC rebel group. We commend MONUSCO for maintaining its defensive posture in protecting civilians and fulfilling its mandate. We call for continued coordination between MONUSCO, FARDC, and Sami DRC in line with their mandates and relevant Security Council resolutions. We also strongly condemn the spoofing and jamming of GPS signals used by MONUSCO and demand that the M23/AFC cease such disruptive activities. While the international community rightfully focuses on evacuating its citizens, diplomats, and staff, we must not forget the safety and security of the Congolese people who have nowhere to seek refuge. The protection of millions of Congolese civilians remains a top priority for the A3+, and we urge MONUSCO to continue its vital role in safeguarding both the population and critical infrastructure in Goma. Second, we call on the M23 AFC rebels to immediately cease hostilities, halt their offensive, and return to their designated pre-cantonment areas. The M23 AFC must engage through the Nairobi process and silence their guns. As we have stated, the ultimate resolution to the conflict in Eastern DRC lies in political dialogue. In light of recent development, the A3+ calls on all parties to engage meaningfully and in good faith in order to create the conditions for peace. In this context, we call on the government of the DRC utilization of the FDLR as outlined in the harmonized plan within the framework of the Luanda process. We call on the government of DRC and the government of Rwanda to return without preconditions to the diplomatic talks under the Luanda process to achieve a lasting and peaceful resolution of the conflict in the region, including by addressing respective issues pertaining to the neutralization of the FDLR and disengagement of the forces outside the territory of the DRC. Third, we strongly urge those who continue to support the M23's advancement to immediately cease such assistance, as it undermines the long-term peace and stability of both the DRC and the border region. We are deeply concerned about the January 25th communique from the M23 AFC, which can only exacerbate tensions and undermine prospects for peace. The government of the DRC must receive our collective support as a council in its effort to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity and to ensure the protection of its people. Further, we urge this council to work strenuously to promote meaningful engagement, to de-escalate tensions, and to avoid attributing blame to the parties to the conflict. We further urge proactive support for the Luanda and Nairobi processes. This includes ensuring that no external actors, intentionally or unintentionally, contribute to the perpetration of the conflict between Rwanda and the DRC, including through the provision of weaponry and other resources. Fourth, we emphasize the urgent need to resume the Nairobi process. We call on the DRC government to be fully committed to the process, and we encourage continued African leadership for engaging all relevant stakeholders and revitalizing the process with the full backing of the international community. Mr. President, as we call for an end to the M23 AFC offensive, the international community must take immediate action to support MONUSCO in alleviating the severe humanitarian crisis in Eastern DRC. According to OCHA, there are currently 6.5 million displaced persons in the country, with over 34,000 newly displaced individuals seeking refuge around Goma. Emergency hospitals in Goma are overwhelmed, with more than 290 individuals wounded, including 90 civilians, many of whom have life-threatening injuries. We must rally behind MONUSCO and other UN agencies to provide vital medical assistance. We are deeply concerned that 80% of Goma's electricity and water supply has been damaged due to the M23 AFC offensive, Furthermore, 400,000 children are currently out of school as a result of the closure of educational institutions in the region. In closing, Mr. President, we wish to express our gratitude to His Excellency President João Lourenço of Angola and former President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya for their unwavering commitment to peace in Eastern DRC and their important contributions under the Luanda and Nairobi processes, respectively. We also echo the call of His Excellency Mustafaki, chairpersons of the African Union Commission, urging all parties to engage in the ongoing peace efforts under the auspices of the Luanda and Nairobi processes. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to today's briefers, and in particular to SRSG Keita for your steadfast leadership of MONUSCO amid a clear and deliberate escalation of the conflict in Eastern DRC. Thank you also to ASG Msuya, and I welcome the participation of the DRC Minister of Foreign Affairs in this meeting. Colleagues, we condemn in the strongest terms Rwanda's and M23's hostilities on Goma and attacks on Sake. We urgently call for a ceasefire and an end to this fighting, which has endangered civilians and further displaced tens of thousands more as hundreds of thousands flee the fighting. The United States commends the MONUSCO leadership for taking such robust steps to defend Sake and Goma from Rwanda and M23's advances. We express our deepest condolences to the families of all of the peacekeepers lost during these attacks, and we commend all MONUSCO personnel for their bravery in protecting civilians during this ongoing assault. Rwanda's use of advanced weaponry and systems, including GPS jamming and spoofing, have interfered with the humanitarian response, endangered MONUSCO, and continue to endanger those fleeing from the violence. These actions must stop immediately. The indiscriminate use of artillery has endangered civilians, with bombs falling on and near IDP sites. Congolese and Rwandan leadership, as well as leaders of the M23 and other armed groups, must issue clear orders not to target civilians and to respect the civilian character of IDP sites. Colleagues, there is no military solution to the conflict in Eastern DRC. To achieve a durable peace, all parties must honor their commitments to the Luanda process and the terms laid out by Angolan President Lourenço and return to the negotiating table. We call for the swift operationalization of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism. We also support the efforts of former President Kenyatta to mediate with M23. All sides of this conflict must respect the ceasefire in place since August and act swiftly to end this fighting. We call on all partners in the Great Lakes region to use the diplomatic tools at their disposal to reinforce this message. All actors must also respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC and put an end to all forms of support to armed groups, whether Congolese or foreign. All parties must uphold human rights and international humanitarian law and ensure immediate and unfettered access to populations in need of humanitarian assistance. The United States remains alarmed by the findings of the recent report of the UN Group of Experts detailing the consolidation of parallel administrations, forced recruitments, and the illicit exploitation of mining areas in M23-controlled territories. And we reiterate in unequivocal terms our condemnation of hate speech and xenophobia, as well as ethnic-based politics. The United States will consider all the tools at its disposal in order to hold accountable those responsible for sustaining armed conflict, instability, and insecurity in the DRC.
I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank USG Lacroix, SRSG Ms. Keita and ASG Ms. Msuya for briefing us on this urgent meeting today. I would also like to welcome the participation of the Honourable Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo in our meeting. Greece commends SRSG Keita and MONUSCO for the continued efforts in these extremely difficult circumstances amidst the escalating crisis in the region. We follow developments closely also through our embassy in Kinshasa, since we have also Greek citizens residing in Goma. Allow me to emphasize 4 key points. First, we strongly condemn the recent flagrant violation of the ceasefire and the subsequent M23's further advance in North Kivu. M23 must reverse the territorial expansion immediately and hold the encirclement of the town of Goma. Threats by M23 of seizing Goma are completely unacceptable. Moreover, as the Secretary General stressed also in his today's statements, the presence of Rwandan troops on Congolese soil and the support to the M23 are very concerning. We call on Rwanda to cease its support for the M23 and to withdraw its forces now, and we reiterate that the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of the DRC must be fully respected. Second, in the next stage, peace cannot be attained without the withdrawal of Rwandan forces and the neutralization of the FDLR by the DRC. It is more imperative than ever that both DRC and particularly Rwanda commit to the ceasefire, re-engage sincerely in the political dialogue, and implement all decisions and commitments agreed under the Luanda process. We commend Angola's President Lorenzo for his continued efforts for peace, and we believe that he deserved the Council's support. As a point of principle, my country, Greece, believes that and supports that African-led solutions are needed to address African issues. Third, the Council ought to focus on humanitarian conditions, especially in North Kivu, that remain very dire. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access. Fourth, we express our deepest condolences to the families of the peacekeepers killed and to the troop contributing countries, South Africa, Malawi, and Uruguay. We hope for a speedy recovery of the peacekeepers injured. We emphasize that attacks against peacekeepers may constitute potential war crimes and that attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers form also a basis for sanctions designations. Finally, MONUSCO must be granted full access and freedom of movement to effectively fulfill its mandate and address urgent needs. The protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel must remain an absolute priority. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, President. I thank USG Lacroix, Special Representative Keita, and ASG Msuya for their updates on the alarming situation in the eastern DRC. No words could truly capture the depth and gravity of the situation that we are witnessing in North Kivu as we speak. We must not and we cannot remain indifferent or silent to what is happening. Mr. President, Slovenia is deeply alarmed by the recent rapid escalation of violence in the eastern DRC. The seizure of vast territories, the displacement of hundreds of thousands of civilians, and the blatant violation of international law are direct assault on regional peace and stability. They undermine the Luanda and Nairobi processes and constitute breach of the ceasefire agreements. The capture of Minova and Sake alongside the looming threat of Goma raises deep alarm and carries catastrophic security and humanitarian consequences. We categorically condemn the actions of the M23 and demand the immediate cessation of all hostilities. We call on them to immediately stop attacks on Goma and halt any plans to seize any part of entire city. We call for the full and unconditional withdrawal of the forces from the territories that they have seized. We reiterate our strong call on Rwanda to immediately cease its support to M23 and fully withdraw its forces from the DRC territory. Any unauthorized military presence in the DRC is a flagrant violation of international law, the UN Charter, and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. At the same time, we urge the DRC to cease all cooperation with the FDLR and other armed groups, honoring their commitments under international law and regional arrangements.
We urge Rwanda and the DRC to take decisive actions to de-escalate tensions in their relations, to re-engage in dialogue, and place the highest priority on peace, stability, and the well-being of the region. The consequences of displacement are severe. Concerns over heightened vulnerability of women and children facing the abhorrent risk of sexual and gender-based violence are high. We strongly warn against deepening ethnic divisions, including hate speech. We remind all parties of their obligations and call on them to uphold international humanitarian and human rights law, ensuring protection of civilians and refraining from any actions, including the use of heavy firepower, which has devastating effects on densely populated areas, including displacement camps. Mr. President, we unequivocally condemn the attacks and threats against MONUSCO and their personnel, as well as SEMI-DRC, in the strongest possible terms. We mourn the tragic loss of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice and extend our condolences to their families. We stand in solidarity with the wounded, wishing them a swift recovery. These acts are not just an affront to those who serve in MONUSCO and may amount to war crimes, but they are also an assault to the very values of the international community and an attack on peace itself. They call for justice and accountability. We extend our gratitude to all troops and police contributing countries for their sacrifice and contribution to the UN efforts in the DRC. We stand with them in these difficult times. Mr. President, a little over a month ago, all 15 members of this Council raised their hands in unison to renew MONUSCO's mandate. That vote was not only symbolic. It was a commitment to the women and men peacekeepers in uniform and beyond, whose foremost duty is the protection of civilians in Eastern DRC and supporting peace efforts in the Eastern DRC. They have put their own lives at risk on a daily basis. Today, these very women and men, alongside millions of innocent civilians, face mortal threats. We mourn the tragic loss of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice, and we stand with others in solidarity. Colleagues, the international community and this Council cannot afford to remain passive in the face of the crisis. We have clearly heard calls from the field to the Council to send a clear message. It is our responsibility to stand unequivocally behind them. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking all the briefers today, and in particular, to extend my thanks to SOSG Keita for her steadfast leadership. I welcome the participation of DRC Foreign Minister Wagner at our meeting, as well as the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, Uruguay, and South Africa. President, MONUSCO peacekeepers and personnel work bravely to deliver this Council's mandate in the most difficult of circumstances. The United Kingdom reiterates clearly today that attacks on UN peacekeepers are absolutely unacceptable and may constitute war crimes. We also recall that planning, directing, sponsoring, or conducting attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers may constitute a basis for UN sanctions designations. The UK extends its sympathies to the families of the Blue Helmets from South Africa and Uruguay who've lost their lives serving in MONUSCO. And we extend our best wishes for a full recovery to those peacekeepers who've been injured. The UK also extends its condolences to the families of all troops from the Southern African Development Community mission in DRC who've lost their lives in support of DRC's stability and security. As we do so, we fully acknowledge the numbers of those lost and injured is changing by the hour. It is a critical moment for DRC and for the region. President, I would now like to make 3 points. First, the UK once again condemns the violent actions of all armed groups, including FDLR and M23. We are deeply concerned by the scale and pace of recent M23 and Rwandan Defence Forces advances in eastern DRC. In December, this Council renewed MONUSCO's mandate, and in the 4 weeks since, M23's unacceptable offensive and that of the Rwandan Defence Forces through North and South Kivu has resulted in the capture of several towns and villages. As we've heard, hundreds of thousands of civilians have been displaced, and violence has intensified as a result. We are also deeply alarmed by M23's declaration that they intend to take Goma, a city where the humanitarian situation is already catastrophic. The rising number of displaced people resulting from M23's territorial expansion has placed further pressure on crowded IDP camps and exacerbates the challenges faced by humanitarian actors. This morning, the UK Foreign Secretary spoke with President Kagame and called for urgent de-escalation, outlining the need for Rwanda and DRC to urgently return to the negotiating table. Now more than ever, it is critical that MONUSCO is able to deliver its mandate. M23 attacks on peacekeepers, with support from the RDF, must stop immediately. These attacks prevent the force from being able to discharge its Security Council mandated mission to protect civilians. Rwandan spoofing and jamming of GPS signals, which obstruct UN and humanitarian operations, must also stop. We urge all parties to remember their obligations under international humanitarian law. Finally, President, the United Kingdom once again extends its thanks to Angola for its leadership on mediation efforts. We encourage DRC and Rwanda to return to the negotiating table and to focus on making tangible progress on delivering on their commitments under the concept of operations. There can be no military solution. Fighting must stop, civilians must be protected, and the parties should engage in good faith in the political process. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. SRG Keita, thank you for your briefing today. MONUSCO is facing immense pressure. Denmark greatly appreciates your continued leadership and engagement. Let me also thank ASG Msuya, and through her, the entire humanitarian community in the DRC, and USG Lacroix and the Department of Peace Operations for their tireless work in support of our peacekeepers. And I welcome the presence of Her Excellency Foreign Minister Wagner in today's meeting. Let me first express Denmark's deepest condolences to the families, friends, and comrades of the brave peacekeepers who have paid the ultimate sacrifice in the service of peace. Mr. President, as we speak, the M23, with the support of Rwandan Defence Forces, are advancing towards Goma. Denmark condemns, in the strongest terms, the M23's offensive in Goma and its recent captures of Minova and Sake. The human suffering this has caused and will cause is unconscionable. Let there be no doubt. This offensive, as well as Rwanda's military presence in the DRC, are clear violations of the terms agreed in the ceasefire, clear violations of the UN Charter, and clear violations of the territorial integrity of the DRC. We call on the M23 and RDF to cease the operations and withdraw from all occupied areas immediately. Mr. President, MONUSCO is operating under extremely difficult circumstances. It faces a hostile opposition that uses GPS interference and increasingly complex weaponry. This not only severely restricts the mission's operations, but also delays humanitarian aid delivery and complicates access to the most vulnerable civilian populations. Let me be very clear. Denmark deplores, in the strongest terms, any attacks against blue helmets, UN staff, and their humanitarian partners. Such attacks are unacceptable and a violation of international law and may constitute war crimes. Mr. President, Eastern DRC has long contended with a multitude of crises. The humanitarian situation is catastrophic. With M23's advance from its surrounding areas, civilians sought protection in overburdened and overcrowded IDP camps in Goma. Widespread sexual and gender-based violence, child recruitments, hate speech and xenophobia, summary killings and other persistent violations of international humanitarian law, as well as violations and abuse of human rights, have been reported and extensively documented. We express our deep concern for the protection of civilians. We call on all parties to immediately comply with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. All responsible parties must be held to account, and the protection of civilians, including human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society, must be ensured. There is an urgent need to guarantee the security of all medical workers and humanitarian personnel, including in IDP camps. Humanitarian access and corridors must be ensured. That goes both for those fleeing and for those staying. Mr. President, the DRC has faced instability and conflict for more than 3 decades. We are now at the brink of a more widespread conflict, with unspeakable devastation, not just for the Congolese people, but for the whole region. We urge all parties to act and engage in good faith and to immediately recommit to the existing, robust processes in place to resolve the conflict. We echo the statements made by the Secretary General and urge the DRC and Rwanda to remain fully engaged in the Luanda process. Momentum must be maintained on the neutralization of the FDLR and withdrawal of Rwandan forces, as well as the swift application of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism. We urge Rwanda to send its representative to the mechanism immediately. Denmark expresses its full support to both the Luanda process and the Nairobi process. We strongly urge Rwanda to immediately cease its support to the M23 and withdraw its forces, and for the DRC to immediately cease its support to the FDLR, both of which have been consistently documented by the group of experts on the DRC. Illegal exploitation of national resources in the eastern DRC is a key driver to instability in Great Lakes region. This must end. We encourage Rwanda and DRC to investigate and prosecute all actors and networks involved. Mr. President, to conclude, as we speak, the Congolese people are suffering that long predates this meeting, this current offensive, and which has deep historical ties. They are looking to this Council to act. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank SRSG Keita, USG Lacroix, ASG Msuya for their briefings. In recent days, tensions have escalated dramatically in Eastern DRC, with M23 launching offensives in North Kivu, capturing key towns such as Masisi, Minova, and Sake, resulting in heavy civilian casualties and displacements. It is shocking that M23 firing at MONUSCO positions, resulting in the death of 3 UN peacekeepers and the injury of many others, as well as serious casualties among Sami DRC troops. China condemns the M23 attacks against local civilians and peacekeepers. We express our condolences to the peacekeepers who lost their lives and sympathy to the injured. Considering the current situation in Eastern DRC, I would like to emphasize the following points. First, China strongly urges M23 to cease attacks immediately. At present, the M23 continues to launch attacks and openly claims that it wants to take Goma, which is a matter of grave concern to China. The possibility of further escalation of the fighting is deeply disconcerting. The relevant actions of M23 constitute a serious violation of the ceasefire agreement and jeopardize regional peace and stability. China calls on M23 to abide by the ceasefire agreement, stop resorting to force, withdraw from the territories it has taken, and return to the track of political settlement. All external forces should refrain from providing military support to the M23 and other armed groups to prevent further deterioration of the situation. Second, the protection of civilians should be the top priority. International humanitarian law is the bottom line that must be respected. No matter what the demands and objectives of the M23 armed attacks are, it should not come at the cost of civilian lives, and it should not attack civilians and civilian facilities. At present, a large number of civilians have fled their homes seeking refuge, and a severe shortage of humanitarian supplies. The international community should provide timely humanitarian assistance. M23 should ensure that the channels of humanitarian assistance are open and unimpeded. Third, MONUSCO should be supported in performing its duties in accordance with its mandate. MONUSCO is at the forefront of the conflict and is carrying out its peacekeeping mandate in line with the Council resolutions. M23 should not threaten the safety and security of peacekeepers. Attacks on peacekeepers may constitute war crimes. China supports MONUSCO in strengthening its defensive measures in Sake and Goma and opposes acts such as jamming GPS signals that impede MONUSCO's mandate delivery. We also call on all parties to refrain from spreading misinformation and disinformation against MONUSCO and peacekeepers. Fourth, we must firmly support regional mediation efforts. Under the current circumstances, it is even more urgent to scale up mediation efforts. Although the tripartite summit has been postponed, the Luanda process remains an effective platform for resolving the issues of Eastern DRC. China expects the DRC and Rwanda to stay committed to the track of political dialogue and strengthen communication and find a lasting peace program. China supports Angola and the other parties concerned in continuing to intensify their diplomatic efforts to ease the situation. It is our hope that SRSG on DRC, Ms. Keita, and the Special Envoy of the SG for the Great Lakes region, Ms. Xia Huang, will strengthen coordination and provide greater support for the Luanda and Nairobi processes. President, China reiterates its firm support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC and support for the efforts of the DRC government in safeguarding national security. We support the Council speak with one voice as soon as possible and create enabling conditions to promote the de-escalation of the crisis in eastern DRC and maintain regional stability. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Pakistan delegation thanks you for convening this urgent meeting of the Security Council. We thank Under-Secretary General Lacroix, SRSG Bintu Keita, and ASG Msuya for their briefings describing the very disturbing situation in eastern DRC. We welcome the participation of the Foreign Minister of the DRC at this meeting, as well as the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, and other countries. I would like to make the following points. First, Pakistan supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter. We deplore any foreign intervention in its internal affairs. We call for the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from the territory of the DRC. Second, we strongly condemn the attacks in North and now South Kivu by the M23. The M23 has captured Sake and encircled Goma, causing sizable civilian casualties, as well as attacking United Nations and African peacekeepers, several of whom have been killed or injured. These attacks on civilians and on UN peacekeepers deployed under the mandate of the Security Council constitute war crimes, and those responsible for perpetrating, supporting, or sponsoring these attacks must be held accountable. We demand that the M23 halt its attacks immediately, withdraw from the areas it has occupied, and observe the ceasefire agreement of 31st July 2024, as well as to end its GPS jamming and spoofing. We express our condolences to South Africa, Uruguay, and to the families of the peacekeepers who have lost their lives in the noble cause of preserving peace and security. Third, we urge that adequate and urgent response be made to the humanitarian crisis that is being faced in eastern DRC. Assistance must reach all those affected by the M23 offensive, and access must be ensured by all parties, including the M23, to the civilian and others in need of such assistance. Fourth, we admire the bravery of our peacekeepers. At the same time, we urge MONUSCO and the United Nations to take immediate measures to ensure the safety and security of not only civilians, but also the United Nations and other peacekeeping units which are in eastern DRC. We are particularly concerned for the Pakistani artillery battery located in Sake and in adjacent areas. It is highly exposed and without supporting forces to defend itself against the M23 forces. This unit should be quickly redeployed for the safety of its personnel and of its heavy and expensive equipment, which must not fall into the hands of the rebel force. Redeployment will also enable the unit to provide support to the DRC forces more effectively. Such redeployment needs to be done immediately and while it is still possible. Fifth, the UN, MONUSCO, and DRC forces must develop an effective military strategy to counter the M23, which outnumbers the DRC and the peacekeepers and has more advanced capabilities. We must ensure respect for MONUSCO and its forces, not only in the region, but within the DRC itself. Pakistan feels that the withdrawal from South Kivu, which saw the withdrawal of Pakistani blue helmets from there, was hasty and influenced by political considerations. I must recall that our troops had succeeded in maintaining peace and order in South Kivu. We need to strengthen MONUSCO and equip it with the capabilities to respond to the challenges which it is facing in eastern DRC. Without adequate reinforcements, equipment, and political support, especially from within DRC, the UN and other peacekeepers cannot be expected to implement their challenging mandate assigned to them by the Council. Sixth, we call on the DRC and Rwanda to resume the dialogue under the Luanda process, ably led by His Excellency President Lourenço of Angola. This process has made encouraging progress. We regret that the 15 December summit did not take place. It should be urgently reconvened. The understandings reached under the Luanda process, the neutralization of the FDLR, and the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from DRC should be maintained and implemented even as the challenge posed by the M23 is confronted and ended. We also hope that reconciliation within DRC will be achieved through the Nairobi process under the able leadership of former President Kenyatta of Kenya. We extend our full support to the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region in promoting dialogue to resolve the conflict in eastern DRC. Finally, Mr. President, we urge that the Security Council address the root cause of the conflict in eastern DRC, that is, the illegal exploitation of its natural resources. This requires greater oversight and traceability mechanisms, working in coordination with the DRC government and regional and international partners, and encouraged and supported by the Security Council. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we are grateful to Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Bintu Keita and Joyce Msuya for their briefings. We welcome the participation in this meeting of the Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Therese Wagner, and the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, South Africa, and Uruguay. Mr. President, we're extremely dismayed by the current escalation by the M23, and we condemn it. Because of its actions, the civilian population is the one that is suffering first and foremost. We express our condolences to the families of all the citizens of the DRC who have died. We're forced to witness another wave of IDPs. Their number, according to the latest UN figures, has exceeded 400,000. Many of these people were already internally displaced persons and were living in refugee camps in the harshest conditions. And we're particularly concerned about the use in the area of direct conflict of advanced weapon systems, the use of heavy artillery close to civilian infrastructure. And we're also troubled by the continued use of electronic warfare means, which creates a threat inter alia for civilian aviation. Unfortunately, the UN mission to stabilize the DRC has also taken casualties. We express our condolences to the families of the peacekeepers that have died from South Africa and Uruguay, as well as the governments of these countries. We hope for the speediest recovery of the wounded from other contingents. Russia unconditionally condemns attacks against blue helmets. As a result of one of such attacks in March of 2022, one of our nationals, a senior member of the Russian military observers group, Alexei Msuya, died. We express our support and gratitude to the UN mission to stabilize the DRC and its leadership and peacekeepers. We also express our deepest condolences to the families of the fighters of the Southern Africa Development Community in Malawi who were killed. Russia expresses solidarity with the governments of these countries and the contingents of this SADC. We hope for their quickest recovery. The current escalation after the breakdown of the Rwanda summit at the end of last year is clear evidence of the price that has to be paid when political instruments do not function. We call for an immediate cessation of military activities and return of Rwanda and the DRC to the negotiating table with Angolan mediation, as well as the confirmation by the parties of their commitment to the mutual obligations in the framework of the Luanda process. At the same time, we'd like to underscore that real progress on the diplomatic track will only be possible after the end of relations of states with illegal armed groups. This applies first and foremost to M23 and the Force Démocratique for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR. Whether the parameters of this process will be determined in the framework of relaunching of the Nairobi process or the result of other initiatives, that should be decided by Rwanda and the DRC. However, it is clear that this issue requires a comprehensive approach and certain flexibility by both sides. Without tackling it, it will not be possible to find a sustainable and viable formula for political resolution of the conflict, and this must be done immediately to avoid the worst. Mr. President, we should not forget that the central element of this crisis is the illegal exploitation of the Congolese natural resources. It's no secret for anyone that currently in the region rich in coltan or rubaya, which is under the control of M23. Everyone also knows that other groups and external players are involved in this criminal business. We all know who they are, and they are enriching themselves by smuggling blood natural resources from the eastern part of the DRC. We are convinced that the struggle to gain access towards strategically important Congolese minerals is one of the reasons for the continuation of the crisis we're witnessing. Once again, we call on countries with political and economic influence in the region to use it and to work with the main protagonists. This could contribute to a rapid end of the escalation, which was demonstrated very well by the situation that we witnessed in 2012 and 2013. At the same time, together with other members of the Security Council, we will continue working on coordinating the appropriate reaction to these events, which are taking place in the east of the DRC. We hope that we will be able to find the right language that will contribute to ending the suffering of the civilian population and a return to negotiations. In conclusion, I'd like to say that we should not forget about the fact that the instability in the Great Lakes region is to a large extent a legacy of the colonial period. It was precisely then that the metropoles of the time laid the ticking time bombs that the region continues to suffer from. We see how the Congolese are tired of violence and how much they just want to live and work on their own land. Russia, as a permanent member of the Security Council, will do everything possible to bring this long-form moment closer. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President,
mi delegación agradece las gestiones de la presidencia de este Consejo por convocar esta reunión de emergencia para abordar la alarmante situación en la República Democrática del Congo. También queremos dar la bienvenida a la ministra de Relaciones Exteriores de la República Democrática del Congo ante esta situación. Reconocemos y valoramos el informe de la representante especial del secretario general en la República Democrática del Congo y jefa de la MONUSCO, Keita, cuyo liderazgo resulta crucial en estos momentos críticos. También expresamos nuestra solidaridad ante las amenazas que nos ha comunicado hoy, las cuales son inaceptables para la República de Panamá. Extendemos también nuestro agradecimiento al secretario general adjunto de Operaciones de Paz, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, y a la subsecretaria general Joyce Msuya por sus valiosas contribuciones en este complejo escenario que ha afectado directamente a cientos de miles de vidas humanas desplazadas. Panamá expresa su profunda preocupación por la escalada del conflicto en el este de la República Democrática del Congo, marcada por los recientes avances del grupo rebelde Movimiento 23 de Marzo en Kibú del Norte, lo que ha agravado aún más la ya frágil situación humanitaria y de seguridad. La reciente ofensiva del 23 de enero ha intensificado el desplazamiento masivo de civiles hacia Goma y ha causado pérdidas irreparables, incluyendo la trágica muerte del gobernador militar de Kibú del Norte, el general de división Peter Sirimwani. Los avances del M23, así como la consolidación de administraciones locales de facto, no solo representan una seria amenaza para la estabilidad de la región, sino que también desafían directamente los esfuerzos internacionales de mediación y paz, como los enmarcados en el proceso de Luanda
y el
under
proceso
the
de
Luanda
Nairobi.
and Nairobi processes.
Condenamos enérgicamente las acciones del
We condemn in the
M23
strongest
y de
terms
todos
the
aquellos que,
actions of the M23
directa o
and of all
indirectamente,
those which
alimentan esta crisis.
directly or
Es
indirectly are
urgente
fueling this
que
crisis.
todos los actores
It's
actúen
urgent
con
for all
responsabilidad
actors to
y
act
cesen de inmediato
responsibly and
cualquier forma de
immediately end
apoyo a los
any
grupos
form of
armados.
support for
De lo
the armed
contrario,
groups.
el
Failing
sufrimiento del
this,
pueblo
the suffering
congoleño
of the
se
Congolese
intensificará
people will
aún más.
worsen yet further.
Señor presidente,
President,
estos acontecimientos
these
también
events
ponen en
are
riesgo
also
las vidas
jeopardizing
del personal de la ONU
the
y
lives
restringen
of
su
UN
capacidad
personnel
para
and
cumplir con
stymieing
su
their
mandato
ability to
de manera efectiva.
effectively implement
Ante este
their
panorama,
mandate.
resulta
Against
fundamental
this
que este
backdrop,
Consejo
it is essential
fortalezca
for
su
this
respaldo a la
Council to
MONUSCO
enhance its
y
support for
hable al
MONUSCO,
unísono, garantizando los recursos
guaranteeing the
y el apoyo
necessary
necesarios
resources and
para responder a
support
los desafíos
to enable
actuales
it to
y
respond
proteger
to
a
the
las
current
poblaciones más
challenges and to
vulnerables.
protect the most vulnerable
Rechazamos y
populations.
condenamos
We reject and we
enérgicamente los
roundly
ataques
condemn the
perpetrados
attacks
contra el personal de las
perpetrated
Naciones
on
Unidas.
United Nations staff.
Asimismo, lamentamos profundamente la
Furthermore,
trágica
we
pérdida de
deeply
vidas
regret
de
the
cascos
tragic
azules
loss
en los
of
recientes
lives of blue
enfrentamientos
helmets in the
ocurridos
recent
durante las
clashes
operaciones en la
during
provincia de Kivu del
operations
Norte,
in the North
en la
Kivu
República
province
Democrática del
in
Congo.
the DRC.
Expresamos nuestra
We
profunda
express our most
solidaridad
heartfelt
y sentido
solidarity
pésame a los gobiernos
and
y pueblos de Sudáfrica,
condolences to the
Malawi y
governments and
Uruguay
peoples of South
por estas
Africa, Malawi,
irreparables
and
pérdidas
Uruguay
humanas.
following these irreparable
También
human losses.
acompañamos a las
We
familias
also
en este momento tan difícil.
align
Honramos la
ourselves and
valentía y el
support the
sacrificio
families at this
de
difficult
quienes con un
time.
compromiso
We
ejemplar
honor the bravery and
dedicaron
the
sus
sacrifice of
esfuerzos a la
those
noble
who,
misión de
with
preservar
exemplary
la
commitment,
paz y la
dedicated
seguridad
their efforts to
internacionales.
the noble mission of preserving international peace and
Reconocemos
security.
y agradecemos a los
We
países que han
recognize and
aportado
we
tropas
thank
a la
those
misión de
countries that have
estabilización de
contributed
las Naciones
troops
Unidas
to
en
the
la
United
República
Nations
Democrática del
Stabilization
Congo,
Mission in the Democratic Republic
contribuyendo
of the
al
Congo,
mandato de proteger a los
thus
civiles
contributing to
y
the mandate
fomentar
of
la
protecting
estabilidad en
civilians
el
and
país.
protecting stability,
Señor
promoting stability
Presidente,
in the country.
distinguidos colegas,
Distinguished colleagues,
hacemos
Mr.
un llamado
President,
contundente a todas las
we
partes involucradas
strongly appeal
para que
to
respeten
all
plenamente el
involved
alto al
parties
fuego,
to fully
a
respect
cesar
the
las hostilidades de
ceasefire, to
inmediato
bring an immediate
y que
end to
honren los
hostilities
compromisos
and to
dispuestos
honor
en
the
los procesos de
commitments made
Luanda y
under
Nairobi.
the Luanda and Nairobi
Asimismo,
processes.
reiteramos la
Furthermore,
necesidad
we
urgente
reiterate the
de
urgent
reanudar las
need
negociaciones
to
bajo el
resume
proceso de Nairobi,
negotiations under the Nairobi
reconociendo que el
process,
diálogo
recognizing
inclusivo
that
que
inclusive
contemple a todos los
dialogue
actores
involving
relevantes
all relevant
es esencial
stakeholders
para
is
alcanzar una
essential
solución política
to
duradera.
reach a lasting political
Presidente,
solution.
para finalizar,
President, to conclude,
Panamá reafirma
Panama
su firme e
reaffirms
inquebrantable
its
compromiso
firm
con la
and
soberanía
unwavering commitment
e integridad
to the
territorial de la
sovereignty and
República
territorial
Democrática del
integrity
Congo.
of the Democratic Republic of the
Creemos
Congo.
que un enfoque
We believe
integral
that
y
a
coordinado
comprehensive
que
and
combine el
coordinated
liderazgo de los
approach
mecanismos
combining the
regionales
leadership
con el
of regional
respaldo decidido de
mechanisms
ese
with the
Consejo
resolute support
es
of this
esencial
Council
para
is
poner
essential
fin a la
to bring an
violencia
end
y
to the
aliviar el
violence and to
sufrimiento del
ease the
pueblo
suffering
congoleño.
of the Congolese people.
Presidente,
President,
el tiempo se agota.
time is running out.
No podemos permitir
We cannot
que las
allow
promesas de
the
paz se
promises of
diluyan en la
peace to
inacción.
fade into inaction.
Hoy más que nunca
Today, more than
es
ever, it is
imperativo
imperative for
que
the
la comunidad
international
internacional
community to step
intensifique
up
sus
its
esfuerzos
efforts
para
to
fortalecer la
strengthen
capacidad operativa de la
MONUSCO's
MONUSCO.
operational capacity.
La historia no juzgará nuestra
History will
intención,
not judge
sino
us on our
nuestras acciones.
intentions, but rather our
Solo con un
actions.
compromiso
Only
firme
with
y acciones
steadfast commitment
concretas
and concrete
podremos
action
allanar
will we
el
be
camino
able to
hacia la
pave the
paz.
way towards
Muchas gracias.
sustainable peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this urgent meeting. I thank SRSG Keita, the USG Lacroix, ASG Msuya for their timely briefings. I also welcome Foreign Minister Wagner of the DRC, as well as the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, Uruguay, South Africa, and Burundi to this meeting. At the outset, the Republic of Korea expresses its deepest condolences and sympathies to the bereaved families and nations of all peacekeepers who have sacrificed their lives in fulfilling their mandate. We also wish a speedy and full recovery to all those injured. I'd like to underscore 4 points today considering the devastating developments on the ground. First, we condemn in the strongest possible terms the ongoing ongoing offensive by the M23 in North Kivu and demand the M23 to immediately cease its unjustifiable attacks. The M23's attempts to capture Goma, a city of around 2 million people, through advances along 3 different axes, have intensified civilian suffering. In the past week alone, as the group has expanded its territory by 11%, the number of IDPs has doubled to 400,000. These actions clearly violate the ceasefire established under the Luanda process, inevitably provoking retaliatory measures by the FARDC. The M23's establishment of parallel administrations in DRC territory also constitute egregious violations of the DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity. These actions must cease immediately. Second, Rwanda must stop all forms of support to the M23, and unauthorized foreign military forces must withdraw from the DRC without delay. Otherwise, consequences will only lead to further violence and instability, not only in eastern DRC, but also in the larger Great Lakes region. Furthermore, the involvement of Burundian and other forces, coupled with the opening of new battlefronts in South Kivu, where MONUSCO has already withdrawn, significantly heightens the risk of this rapidly expanding crisis escalating into a full-scale regional conflict. Third, the safety and security of peacekeepers must be upheld as a requisite priority in carrying out their mandates. In this light, we strongly condemn the attacks against the positions and bases of MONUSCO and the Sami DRC, which have already resulted in numerous casualties. The use of GPS jamming and spoofing, along with the deployment of surface-to-air missiles, is particularly alarming. Credible reports implicating Rwanda in these hostile acts are profoundly troubling. These actions gravely undermine the safety and security of UN peacekeepers and significantly hinder MONUSCO's ability to fulfill its key mandate of protecting civilians. We take this opportunity to reiterate that attacks against peacekeepers may constitute war crimes, and the involvement in such acts warrant sanctions designations in accordance with Security Council resolutions. Fourth, we call on the DRC and Rwanda to return to dialogue and fully implement their commitments under the Luanda process. The postponement of the tripartite summit planned for December was disappointing, but it must not undermine the progress achieved thus far. We recognize the differing interests of the DRC and Rwanda, but further escalation of tensions is simply unacceptable. Many lives are at stake. We reaffirm our unwavering support for President Lourenço of Angola and his important mediation efforts. All commitments under the Luanda process must be upheld, including the neutralization of the FDLR and the disengagement of forces. The operationalization of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism is essential to ensure strict compliance with the ceasefire. In conclusion, Mr. President, as we stand on the precipice of even greater violence and instability in eastern DRC, my delegation reiterates our urgent appeal for de-escalation and for all parties to step back from the brink. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, permettez-moi, au nom du gouvernement et du peuple de la République démocratique du Congo, d'exprimer nos remerciements pour la convocation de cette réunion dans un si bref délai. Nous saluons l'engagement de la présidence algérienne et nous reconnaissons la contribution des États-Unis lors de la précédente présidence. Nous exprimons également notre gratitude au secrétaire général des Nations Unies, son Excellence Antonio Guterres, et saluons les contributions essentielles de Mme Bintou Keita, M. Jean-Pierre Lacroix et Mme Msuya, dont les efforts soutiennent la paix et la sécurité dans notre pays. Avant de poursuivre mon intervention, je souhaiterais marquer une pause pour rendre hommage au sacrifice ultime consenti au cours des dernières 72 heures par les soldats de la paix de la MONUSCO et de la communauté de développement d'Afrique australe SADC en République démocratique du Congo. J'honore également la bravoure des forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo et la mémoire des populations congolaises civiles martyrisées par le Rwanda. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, l'histoire nous convoque aujourd'hui ici dans cette enceinte où se scelle le destin des nations. Elle ne tolère ni l'indifférence ni l'hésitation. Ce que traverse la République démocratique du Congo n'est pas un conflit parmi d'autres, mais une agression délibérée et méthodique contre un État souverain. Une violation flagrante des principes fondateurs de cette organisation et une atteinte intolérable à la paix et à la sécurité internationale. La République démocratique du Congo attend légitimement de ce Conseil qu'il agisse avec fermeté et diligence pour protéger la paix et la sécurité internationale et imposer le droit international, un pouvoir qui lui est exclusivement conféré par la Charte des Nations Unies. Monsieur le Président, en cet instant même, alors que je me tiens devant vous, une attaque d'une gravité inouïe se déroule sous les yeux du monde. De nouvelles troupes rwandaises ont franchi les bornes 12 et 13 du poste frontalier séparant Goma de Gisenyi, pénétrant sur notre territoire en plein jour, dans une violation ouverte et délibérée de notre souveraineté nationale. C'est une agression frontale, une déclaration de guerre qui ne se cache plus derrière des artifices diplomatiques. À Goma, les forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, soutenues par les troupes des Nations Unies et de la SADC, défendent la ville et sa population sur plusieurs fronts, avec la bravoure et la détermination que seule la juste et noble cause de défendre son droit légitime d'exister peut insuffler. Mais ce combat ne se limite pas au champ de bataille. Plus de 3 millions de civils ainsi que des humanitaires sont pris en otage par les agresseurs, utilisés comme des boucliers dans une stratégie cynique de terreur et de chaos. Les signes ne trompent pas, le Rwanda se prépare à orchestrer un carnage à ciel ouvert, avec une brutalité qui rappelle les heures les plus sombres de notre histoire. Il est impératif que les combats cessent immédiatement. Chaque heure qui passe rapproche notre région d'une tragédie d'une ampleur insoutenable. Nous refusons de voir se répéter le cauchemar de 1996, ce chapitre sombre de l'histoire africaine que nous pensions clos. Aujourd'hui, les victimes ne sont pas seulement congolaises. Cette attaque est dirigée contre l'Afrique tout entière. Que dis-je? Contre l'humanité entière. Les balles rwandaises frappent indistinctement les Sud-Africains, les Tanzaniens, les Malawites, les Burundais, les Uruguayens, tous frères et sœurs venus pour la paix. Et que dire de vous, membres de ce Conseil?
And what about you, members of the Council? This aggression is not only aimed against the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it is aimed at you, your mission, against your soldiers of peace that you have mandated to protect and not to be targeted. Let me be absolutely clear. Each minute that passes without decisive action by this Council is a victory for the aggressor. Each hesitation undermines the credibility of the United Nations and condemns innocence
Monsieur le
to an
Président,
unspeakable fate.
Mesdames
Mr.
et Messieurs,
President,
le
ladies and
monde vous
gentlemen,
regarde, il
the
est temps
world is
d'agir.
watching you. It's time to act.
Depuis le 6 janvier
Since the
2025,
6th of January
les
of
forces de défense du
2025,
Rwanda
the
et leurs supplétifs du
Defense
M23
Forces of Rwanda,
intensifient leurs attaques
RDF,
en
and their
violation
auxiliaries
flagrante
from the
du
M23
cessez-le-feu
have
du
stepped up
4
their
août
attacks in flagrant
2024,
violation of the
occupant les
ceasefire of the
localités
4th of August
stratégiques telles que Katale,
2024, occupying
Bouchebere, Masisi Centre,
strategic
avant de
towns such as
progresser vers
Katale,
Bweremana,
Lushebere, and
Minova
Masisi
et
Center,
Kalungu.
before continuing on to
Ces attaques
Bweremana,
aggravent une
Minova,
situation
and
humanitaire
Kalunga.
déjà
These
catastrophique,
attacks aggravate an
provoquant le
already
déplacement de millions de
disastrous
Congolais et
humanitarian
visant à
situation,
chasser
provoking
les
the
civils de leur
displacement of
foyer
millions of
pour établir
Congolese,
une administration
aiming to
parallèle
drive them out
et
from their
modifier la
homes and
configuration
establishing
de
a
la région.
parallel administration and
À Goma,
modify the configuration
les
of the
RDF
region.
ont
In
délibérément
Goma,
coupé
the RDF have
les lignes
deliberately cut
d'approvisionnement en
lines of
électricité
supply for electricity and water.
bloqué les
They have
routes
blocked
d'accès
strategic
stratégiques
roads
et utilisé les
and
brouilleurs
used
GPS,
GPS
mettant en
jamming,
danger les vols civils et
endangering
humanitaires.
civilian and
Le
humanitarian
19
flights.
janvier
On the
2025,
19th of
l'hôpital de
January of
Médecins
this
sans
year,
frontières à
the
Masisi
hospital of the
Centre
Doctors
a été
Without
frappé
Borders
par
in
une roquette,
Masisi Center
blessant 2
was hit by a
humanitaires.
rocket, wounding
Ces
2
actes,
humanitarian
comme les
workers.
attaques
These
répétées contre les camps
actions,
de
as
déplacés,
well as the
illustrent une
continued
violation
attacks
manifeste
against
du droit
IDP
international
camps,
humanitaire
illustrate a clear
et révèlent
violation by
l'objectif
Rwanda of
des
international
RDF et
humanitarian
du
law and
M23.
reveal the goal of DFR
Semer la
and the
terreur et
M23,
paralyser
which is to sow
l'assistance
terror
humanitaire.
and paralyze humanitarian
Nous mettons
assistance.
en garde
We
contre le piège du
would
prétexte
warn
fallacieux
against falling
avancé
into
par
the
le
trap
gouvernement
of the
rwandais
fallacious
qui brandit la
pretext put
protection
forward by
d'une de nos
the
nombreuses
government of
minorités
Rwanda,
comme
which has invoked the
justification
protection of one
de
of our
son
numerous
ingérence.
minorities as
La
justification
réalité
for
est
its
tout autre.
interference. The
Aujourd'hui,
reality is
dans
very
les camps de
different.
déplacés
Today, in the
congolais, les
Congolese
victimes
IDP
sont
camps,
de toutes
the
les
victims
ethnies,
are
y
of all
compris
ethnic
les
groups,
Tutsis
including
congolais
the
qui subissent
Congolese
le même sort
Tutsis
tragique
that are
que
suffering
leurs
the same
concitoyens
tragic fate
face à la
that their
violence
fellow
des forces armées
citizens
rwandaises
in the
et du
face
M23.
of the violence
Alors que nous
of
faisons face à cette catastrophe
throughout
humanitaire,
Rwandan
il est
armed
clair que
forces
cette crise
M23.
est directement
So as we
liée
face
au
this
pillage
humanitarian
économique
disaster,
de
it's
notre
clear
pays.
that this crisis is
Le dernier
directly
rapport
linked
du
to the
groupe d'experts des
economic
Nations
plunder
Unies révèle
of the
l'ampleur
est
du
of our
pillage
country. The last
orchestré par
report of
le
the group
Rwanda.
of experts
Chaque mois,
reveals the
plus de
scale of the
150
economic
tonnes de
plunder
coltan
by
sont
Rwanda
illégalement
in the east
extraites
of the
et
DRC.
acheminées
Each
vers le
month, over
Rwanda, où elles
150
sont
tons of
frauduleusement
coltan are illegally
étiquetées pour
extracted and
l'exportation.
transported to
Ce
Rwanda,
commerce
where they're
illicite compromet
fraudulously
la
labeled
souveraineté de la RDC
for
et
export.
finance
This illicit
directement
commerce
les
compromises the
activités
sovereignty of
militaires
our
des forces
country and
armées rwandaises et du
finances
M23.
military
À
activities of
Rubaya,
the
le site
DFR and
le plus grand
M23. In Rubaya, the
d'exploitation
largest
de
site
coltan
of
de la région,
mining of coltan in the
les
region,
RDF et le
the
M23 ont
RDF
établi
and
une
the
administration
M23
parallèle,
have established a
exploitant nos
parallel
ressources et
administration,
imposant leur contrôle
exploiting our
sur les
resources and
populations
imposing their
locales en
control
toute
on
impunité.
local populations with
Ces
complete
activités
impunity. These
doivent être
activities
sanctionnées.
must be punished.
Cependant, cette
However,
exploitation
this
illégale
illegal
n'est
exploitation
pas un aspect n'est qu'un aspect de l'agression menée par le Rwanda. Depuis le début de leur campagne de terreur en 2022, les RDF et le M23 ont systématiquement ciblé les forces de maintien de la paix. Le 24 janvier 2025, le général-major Peter Chirimwami Nkuba, gouverneur militaire du Nord Kivu, a été lâchement assassiné par les forces armées rwandaises alors qu'il commandait sur la ligne de front. Le 25 janvier, 9 soldats sud-africains, 3 soldats du Malawi et 1 soldat uruguayen ont été tués dans des affrontements avec le Rwanda et le M23. Un char des Nations Unies a été incendié, marquant un nouveau seuil dans l'hostilité ouverte envers les institutions multilatérales. Par ailleurs, une compagnie de casques bleus tanzaniens à Kanyabayonga reste jusqu'à présent encerclée et coupée de tout approvisionnement par les RDF et le M23. Le dernier rapport du groupe d'experts révèle également l'utilisation par les RDF et leurs supplétifs d'un arsenal sophistiqué, missiles solaires, mortiers guidés par GPS et missiles anti-chars. Ces violations flagrantes du régime d'embargo sur les armes et le droit international humanitaire menacent gravement la paix et la sécurité de la région des Grands Lacs. Ces 3 dimensions, humanitaire, économique et sécuritaire, révèlent une réalité incontestable. Une agression systématique et coordonnée contre la République démocratique du Congo par le Rwanda. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, le processus de Luanda, conçu pour offrir un cadre de résolution pacifique, a été saboté par l'intransigeance du Rwanda. Chaque engagement pris à Luanda a été piétiné, à commencer par le cessez-le-feu du 4 août. Aussi, Depuis l'établissement du mécanisme de vérification ad hoc renforcé à Goma le 5 novembre 2024, le Rwanda n'a jamais envoyé ses 3 experts militaires pour superviser la mise en œuvre du cessez-le-feu. Rappelez-vous, lors de notre dernière réunion du 8 décembre dans cette salle, le représentant permanent du Rwanda avait affirmé que les experts étaient en route pour Goma. Aujourd'hui, 82 jours plus tard, ils ne sont toujours pas arrivés. Le 15 décembre, le Rwanda a sciemment saboté le sommet convoqué par le facilitateur du processus de Luanda, son Excellence João Lourenço, en ignorant son invitation. Et le 23 janvier, le président du Rwanda a surpris le monde entier en sollicitant la médiation de la Turquie, s'éloignant ainsi des principes de solutions africaines aux problèmes africains. Malgré ce mépris flagrant affiché par le Rwanda pour le processus de Luanda, la République démocratique du Congo reste pleinement engagée et réitère sa confiance en son Excellence João Lourenço. Ce processus, endossé par l'Union africaine, demeure le seul cadre légitime pour une solution politique au conflit entre la République démocratique du Congo et le Rwanda. Ce cadre, exclusivement interétatique, ne saurait inclure des acteurs non étatiques ni les élever au même rang que des États souverains. La République démocratique du Congo rejettera toute tentative d'inclusion du M23 dans le processus de Luanda, l'orientant plutôt vers ce cadre légitime, le processus de Nairobi, sous la facilitation de son Excellence Uhuru Kenyatta. La République démocratique du Congo renouvelle toute sa confiance en lui et rejette toute tentative visant à diluer les efforts de la médiation. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, malgré les alertes répétées du gouvernement congolais depuis 3 ans, ce Conseil est resté passif. Ce Conseil ne peut se contenter de déclarations de préoccupation ou de rester simplement saisi de la question. Son mandat, son devoir est de protéger la paix et la sécurité internationale, de défendre la vie humaine sans distinction d'origine, de race, de religion ou de genre. Ce Conseil est le garant de l'espoir et de la foi en des jours meilleurs, des jours de paix, de développement et de prospérité. C'est pourquoi nous appelons ce Conseil à agir de manière décisive et immédiate, conformément aux preuves accablantes fournies par le dernier rapport de groupe d'experts. Voici les actions concrètes que nous exigeons. Le Conseil de sécurité doit ordonner immédiatement la fin des hostilités par le Rwanda et exiger le retrait immédiat des troupes rwandaises présentes sur le territoire congolais. Le Conseil de sécurité doit imposer des sanctions ciblées, incluant le gel des avoirs et l'interdiction de voyager, non seulement contre les membres identifiés de la chaîne de commandement des forces armées rwandaises, mais aussi contre les décideurs politiques responsables de cette agression. Le Conseil de sécurité doit imposer un embargo total sur les exportations de tous les minerais étiquetés comme rwandais, en particulier le coltan et l'or, afin de mettre fin à l'exploitation illégale des ressources naturelles de la République démocratique du Congo. Le Conseil de sécurité doit révoquer immédiatement le statut du Rwanda en tant que contributeur de troupes aux missions de paix des Nations Unies. Il est inconcevable que ce même pays qui contribue aux missions de la paix des Nations Unies est celui qui participe maintenant activement, directement, aux attaques contre des soldats de la paix. Le Conseil de sécurité, finalement, doit instaurer un régime de notification systématique pour toute vente et transfert d'armes au Rwanda par les États membres ou des entités privées. Cela garantira que ces armes ne soient pas utilisées pour équiper des groupes armés sous embargo, tels que le M23. Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, ce Conseil est un tournant majeur. L'indécision et l'inaction ne peuvent plus être tolérées face à une crise qui menace de plonger notre pays et la région dans un chaos absolu. Chaque jour de retard alimente l'agresseur et affaiblit les principes mêmes qui fondent cette organisation. Nous appelons donc ce Conseil à utiliser pleinement l'ensemble des dispositions et mesures prévues par le chapitre 7 de la Charte des Nations Unies afin de préserver la paix et de protéger la souveraineté de la République démocratique du Congo. Le peuple congolais nourrit une aspiration profonde, celle de vivre en sécurité.
living in
de
security,
bâtir un avenir
to
prospère et de
building a
contribuer
prosperous
activement
future
aux
and
côtés des
actively
nations du
contribute
monde à un ordre
together with
international
other nations
fondé
of the
sur le
world to an
respect du droit
international
et
order
des principes
based on the respect
de
for law
justice.
and
Cette
principles of
aspiration ne
justice.
sera pas étouffée.
This aspiration will not
Nous
be
vous demandons
stifled.
d'écrire une nouvelle
We
page de courage et
exhort you
d'engagement,
to
une
write
page
a
où les
new page
valeurs
of
du
courage and
multilatéralisme
a
et de
commitment, a
solidarité
page where the
priment
values of
sur l'indifférence et
multilateralism
le
and
calcul.
solidarity
L'histoire
prevail
se
over
souviendra
indifference and calculation.
de vos décisions
History will
aujourd'hui, comme
remember
elle se
your
souviendra
decisions today
de notre
as it
lutte
will
incessante
remember
pour
our
la paix, la
tireless
dignité et la
fight
souveraineté.
for peace, dignity
Et
and
à ceux
sovereignty. And to
qui
those
oseraient justifier
who would
l'injustifiable,
dare
nous
to
disons ceci,
justify what
il n'y
cannot
a
be
aucune
justified,
place dans
we
ces
will say
salles
this:
dédiées à la
there
paix
is
mondiale
no place
pour
in
des
these
discours qui
chambers
cherchent à
dedicated to
excuser
global
le
peace
péché
for rhetoric
impardonnable
that
de
seeks to
sacrifier des vies
justify the
innocentes.
inexcusable
Le
sin
respect
of
dû aux
sacrificing
centaines de
innocent
milliers de
lives.
vies
The
en jeu
respect
exige le silence face à l'évidence.
for the
Face à l'adversité,
hundreds of thousands
le
of
peuple
lives at
congolais
stake
se
demands
distingue
silence
par
in
une
the face of the
résilience,
evidence.
une dignité et une
The Congolese
détermination qui
people
imposent le
have
respect.
demonstrated
Ce courage
resilience and
exemplaire,
dignity and
porté par le
determination that
désir
demand
de vivre
respect.
en
This exemplary
sécurité, de
courage,
bâtir un
fueled by the
avenir
desire to
prospère
live in
et de
security,
contribuer
to
à un
build
ordre
a prosperous
international
future and
juste,
to contribute to an
témoigne
international,
de la grandeur du Congo.
just international
Cette
order
force
is a sign of the
inébranlable
greatness of
ne
the
sera
Congo.
jamais brisée.
This unbreakable spirit
Je vous
will never
remercie.
be crushed. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kayikwamba Wagner for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. Allow me to begin by thanking the Algerian presidency for its able leadership at the helm of the Security Council for this month of January. We also thank Algeria, for convening this important meeting. I recognize the presence and the briefing given before by SRSG Bintou Keita and USG Lacroix and ASG Joyce Msuya. I also recognize the presence of the Foreign Minister of DRC and the participation of Angola, Uruguay, South Africa, and Burundi. Mr. President, Rwanda regrets the deteriorating security situation in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo.
The 9,849 meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
Today, despite ongoing MONUSCO support to FRDC, M23, and Rwandan forces penetrated Munigi, captured in the outskirts of Goma city, causing mass panic and flight among the population. Roads are blocked, and the airport can no longer be used for evacuation or humanitarian efforts. M23 has declared the airspace over Goma closed. In other words, we are trapped. I call on this council to act now to secure the civilian population, humanitarian aid workers, and all United Nations personnel.
La force n'est pas une option. Dans ce cadre, la France appelle au retrait des troupes rwandaises du territoire congolais, à la mise en œuvre du plan de démantèlement des forces démocratiques de libération du Rwanda, conformément aux engagements qu'ils ont pris dans le cadre du processus de Luanda. Enfin, la France exprime tout son soutien à la MONUSCO, qui joue un rôle indispensable pour la protection des civils et dont le mandat a été renouvelé à l'unanimité le 20 décembre dernier. Nous condamnons fermement les attaques menées par le M23 à son encontre, qui ont déjà conduit à la mort de plusieurs casques bleus ces derniers jours. Nous rappelons que les attaques contre les casques bleus sont susceptibles de constituer des crimes de guerre. Nous saluons le courage des soldats déployés dans le cadre de la MONUSCO et nous exprimons nos condoléances aux familles de ceux ayant fait le sacrifice ultime, ainsi qu'à l'Afrique du Sud, à l'Uruguay et au Malawi. Violation claire de la Charte des Nations Unies. Cette offensive, comme le soutien au mouvement de dizaines de milliers de civils. Le M23 doit cesser immédiatement son offensive et se retirer. Monsieur le Président, les réactions de la communauté internationale doivent être à la mesure des conséquences humanitaires et politiques que provoque l'offensive en cours du M23, soutenue par les forces de défense du Rwanda. La France appelle l'ensemble du Conseil de sécurité à se mobiliser et à condamner d'une même voix cette menace grave à la paix et à la sécurité régionale et internationale, comme le secrétaire général des Nations Unies l'a à nouveau fait ce matin dans des termes très clairs. Je vous remercie.
This morning, the UK Foreign Secretary spoke with President Kagame and called for urgent de-escalation, outlining the need for Rwanda and DRC to urgently return to the negotiating table. Now more than ever, it is critical that MONUSCO is able to deliver its mandate. M23 attacks on peacekeepers, with support from the RDF, must stop immediately. These attacks prevent the force from being able to discharge its Security Council mandated mission to protect civilians. Rwandan spoofing and jamming of GPS signals, which obstruct UN and humanitarian operations, must also stop. We urge all parties to remember their obligations under international humanitarian law. We encourage DRC and Rwanda to return to the negotiating table and to focus on making tangible progress on delivering on their commitments under the concept of operations. There can be no military solution. Fighting must stop, civilians must be protected, and the parties should engage in good faith in the political process.
We reiterate in unequivocal terms our condemnation of hate speech and xenophobia, as well as ethnic-based politics. The United States will consider all the tools at its disposal in order to hold accountable those responsible for sustaining armed conflict, instability, and insecurity in the DRC.
Monsieur le Président, en cet instant même, alors que je me tiens devant vous, une attaque d'une gravité inouïe se déroule sous les yeux du monde. De nouvelles troupes rwandaises ont franchi les bornes 12 et 13 du poste frontalier séparant Goma de Gisenyi, pénétrant sur notre territoire en plein jour, dans une violation ouverte et délibérée de notre souveraineté nationale. C'est une agression frontale, une déclaration de guerre qui ne se cache plus derrière des artifices diplomatiques. À Goma, les forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, soutenues par les troupes des Nations Unies et de la SADC, défendent la ville et sa population sur plusieurs fronts, avec la bravoure et la détermination que seule la juste et noble cause de défendre son droit légitime d'exister peut insuffler. Mais ce combat ne se limite pas au champ de bataille. Plus de 3 millions de civils, ainsi que des humanitaires, sont pris en otage par les agresseurs, utilisés comme des boucliers dans une stratégie cynique de terreur et de chaos. Les signes ne trompent pas, le Rwanda se prépare à orchestrer un carnage à ciel ouvert, avec une brutalité qui rappelle les heures les plus sombres de notre histoire. Il est impératif que les combats cessent immédiatement. Chaque heure qui passe rapproche notre région d'une tragédie d'une ampleur insoutenable.
Mr. President, Rwanda regrets the deteriorating security situation in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The current crisis could have been averted had the DRC government demonstrated a genuine commitment to peace. The DRC has all the necessary tools to achieve a lasting resolution to the ongoing conflict.
It is with profound regret that this meeting is taking place at a time when a number of peacekeepers have lost their lives and many others injured in the line of duty. 9 of these fallen peacekeepers are South Africans who showed immense bravery amidst relentless attacks from the M23. These attacks from the M23 are in violation of the ceasefire that was brokered through the Luanda process. We deplore the unwarranted attacks against MONUSCO and the South African Development Community Mission in the DRC's uniformed personnel who are deployed not only to promote peace, security, and stability in the Eastern DRC, but by extension in the African continent in general. It is crucial for the Rwandan Defense Forces to cease support to the M23 and for the M23 to immediately cease all hostile actions and withdraw from occupied territories. We cannot accept a world wherein non-state actors are armed to do the will of other states, while those states refuse to accept responsibility for unnecessary armed violence and potential war crimes. Peacekeeping as a tool will be rendered ineffective when the peacekeepers and peacekeeping operations face complex political situations, such as that in the Eastern DRC, when other states get militarily involved in fueling conflict.
I now give the floor to Therese.
The international community can no longer afford to simply watch as conflict in the Eastern DRC continues to displace, maim, and kill innocent civilians. The current situation in the Eastern DRC requires decisive action from the international community led by this Council. The Security Council must use the tools at its disposal to act against those who perpetuate the conflict in the Eastern DRC, including calling for their withdrawal from the DRC. There must also be a resumption of both the Luanda and Nairobi processes to find a lasting political solution to the cyclical conflict in the Eastern DRC. Concerning that the fundamental principle of sovereignty and territory, we urgently call on the relevant parties to engage in this process with a view to agree a negotiated settlement that includes peace and stability in the entire Great Lakes region and in the African continent at large. And for its part, South Africa will continue to play a constructive role in promoting peace and stability in Eastern DRC and the entire continent, including through peacekeeping efforts.
The 9,849th meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
Today, despite ongoing MONUSCO support to FRDC, M23, and Rwandan forces penetrated Munigi, captured in the outskirts of Goma city, causing mass panic and flight among the population. Roads are blocked, and the airport can no longer be used for evacuation or humanitarian efforts. M23 has declared the airspace over Goma closed. In other words, we are trapped. I call on this council to act now to secure the civilian population, humanitarian aid workers, and all United Nations personnel.
La force n'est pas une option. Dans ce cadre, la France appelle au retrait des troupes rwandaises du territoire congolais, à la mise en œuvre du plan de démantèlement des forces démocratiques de libération du Rwanda, conformément aux engagements qu'ils ont pris dans le cadre du processus de Luanda. Enfin, la France exprime tout son soutien à la MONUSCO, qui joue un rôle indispensable pour la protection des civils et dont le mandat a été renouvelé à l'unanimité le 20 décembre dernier. Nous condamnons fermement les attaques menées par le M23 à son encontre, qui ont déjà conduit à la mort de plusieurs casques bleus ces derniers jours. Nous rappelons que les attaques contre les casques bleus sont susceptibles de constituer des crimes de guerre. Nous saluons le courage des soldats déployés dans le cadre de la MONUSCO et nous exprimons nos condoléances aux familles de ceux ayant fait le sacrifice ultime, ainsi qu'à l'Afrique du Sud, à l'Uruguay et au Malawi. Violation claire de la Charte des Nations Unies. Cette offensive, comme le soutien au mouvement de dizaines de milliers de civils. Le M23 doit cesser immédiatement son offensive et se retirer. Monsieur le Président, les réactions de la communauté internationale doivent être à la mesure des conséquences humanitaires et politiques que provoque l'offensive en cours du M23, soutenue par les forces de défense du Rwanda. La France appelle l'ensemble du Conseil de sécurité à se mobiliser et à condamner d'une même voix cette menace grave à la paix et à la sécurité régionale et internationale, comme le secrétaire général des Nations Unies l'a à nouveau fait ce matin dans des termes très clairs. Je vous remercie.
This morning, the UK Foreign Secretary spoke with President Kagame and called for urgent de-escalation, outlining the need for Rwanda and DRC to urgently return to the negotiating table. Now more than ever, it is critical that MONUSCO is able to deliver its mandate. M23 attacks on peacekeepers, with support from the RDF, must stop immediately. These attacks prevent the force from being able to discharge its Security Council mandated mission to protect civilians. Rwandan spoofing and jamming of GPS signals, which obstruct UN and humanitarian operations, must also stop. We urge all parties to remember their obligations under international humanitarian law. We encourage DRC and Rwanda to return to the negotiating table and to focus on making tangible progress on delivering on their commitments under the concept of operations. There can be no military solution. Fighting must stop, civilians must be protected, and the parties should engage in good faith in the political process.
We reiterate in unequivocal terms our condemnation of hate speech and xenophobia, as well as ethnic-based politics. The United States will consider all the tools at its disposal in order to hold accountable those responsible for sustaining armed conflict, instability, and insecurity in the DRC.
Monsieur le Président, en cet instant même, alors que je me tiens devant vous, une attaque d'une gravité inouïe se déroule sous les yeux du monde. De nouvelles troupes rwandaises ont franchi les bornes 12 et 13 du poste frontalier séparant Goma de Gisenyi, pénétrant sur notre territoire en plein jour, dans une violation ouverte et délibérée de notre souveraineté nationale. C'est une agression frontale, une déclaration de guerre qui ne se cache plus derrière des artifices diplomatiques. À Goma, les forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, soutenues par les troupes des Nations Unies et de la SADC, défendent la ville et sa population sur plusieurs fronts, avec la bravoure et la détermination que seule la juste et noble cause de défendre son droit légitime d'exister peut insuffler. Mais ce combat ne se limite pas au champ de bataille. Plus de 3 millions de civils, ainsi que des humanitaires, sont pris en otage par les agresseurs, utilisés comme des boucliers dans une stratégie cynique de terreur et de chaos. Les signes ne trompent pas, le Rwanda se prépare à orchestrer un carnage à ciel ouvert, avec une brutalité qui rappelle les heures les plus sombres de notre histoire. Il est impératif que les combats cessent immédiatement. Chaque heure qui passe rapproche notre région d'une tragédie d'une ampleur insoutenable.
Mr. President, Rwanda regrets the deteriorating security situation in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The current crisis could have been averted had the DRC government demonstrated a genuine commitment to peace. The DRC has all the necessary tools to achieve a lasting resolution to the ongoing conflict.
It is with profound regret that this meeting is taking place at a time when a number of peacekeepers have lost their lives and many others injured in the line of duty. 9 of these fallen peacekeepers are South Africans, who showed immense bravery amidst relentless attacks from the M23. These attacks from the M23 are in violation of the ceasefire that was brokered through the Luanda process. We deplore the unwarranted attacks against MONUSCO and the South African Development Community Mission in the DRC's uniformed personnel, who are deployed not only to promote peace, security, and stability in the Eastern DRC, but by extension in the African continent in general. It is crucial for the Rwandan Defense Forces to cease support to the M23, and for the M23 to immediately cease all hostile actions and withdraw from occupied territories. We cannot accept a world wherein non-state actors are armed to do the will of other states, while those states refuse to accept responsibility for unnecessary armed violence and potential war crimes. Peacekeeping as a tool will be rendered ineffective when the peacekeepers and peacekeeping operations face complex political situations, such as that in the Eastern DRC, when other states get militarily involved in fueling conflict.
I now give the floor to Therese.
The international community can no longer afford to simply watch as conflict in the Eastern DRC continues to displace, maim, and kill innocent civilians. The current situation in the Eastern DRC requires decisive action from the international community led by this Council. The Security Council must use the tools at its disposal to act against those who perpetuate the conflict in the Eastern DRC, including calling for their withdrawal from the DRC. There must also be a resumption of both the Luanda and Nairobi processes to find a lasting political solution to the cyclical conflict in the Eastern DRC. Concerning that the fundamental principle of sovereignty and territory. We urgently call on the relevant parties to engage in this process with the view to agree a negotiated settlement that includes peace and stability in the entire Great Lakes region and in the African continent at large. And for its part, South Africa will continue to play a constructive role in promoting peace and stability in Eastern DRC and the entire continent, including through peacekeeping efforts.
The 9,849th meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
Today, despite ongoing MONUSCO support to FRDC, M23 and Rwandan forces penetrated Munigi, captured in the outskirts of Goma city, causing mass panic and flight among the population. Roads are blocked and the airport can no longer be used for evacuation or humanitarian efforts. M23 has declared the airspace over Goma closed. In other words, we are trapped. I call on this council to act now to secure the civilian population, humanitarian aid workers, and all United Nations personnel.
La force n'est pas une option. Dans ce cadre, la France appelle au retrait des troupes rwandaises du territoire congolais et à la mise en œuvre du plan de démantèlement des forces démocratiques de libération du Rwanda, conformément aux engagements qu'ils ont pris dans le cadre du processus de Luanda. Enfin, la France exprime tout son soutien à la MONUSCO, qui joue un rôle indispensable pour la protection des civils et dont le mandat a été renouvelé à l'unanimité le 20 décembre dernier. Nous condamnons fermement les attaques menées par le M23 à son encontre.